I think a lot of times Christians' perception of the demonic and the demonic realm can be based more upon Hollywood's portrayal than the Bible. And you hear people saying things, because I've had to counsel people who think they're being plagued by demons, and a lot of what they're saying sounds like it came out of a Hollywood script. And they're like, well, I heard that. Well, where did you hear that from? Demons operate this way. Well, who told you that? And it's all based upon Hollywood, which really began in the 70s with Poltergeist, is when that kind of portrayal of the demonic became popular. There wasn't a lot of movies before that of that nature or variety. Now they got movies that essentially even openly glorify Satanism and glorify things like that. So we've come a long way from Alfred Hitchcock with a bunch of birds in the sky. It's supposed to be a horror type film. Has anyone ever seen Birds? Watch out, there's a lot of birds everywhere. It's really scary.
Bird Box.
Dad's favorite movie.
Oh, yeah?
No, she's scared of birds.
Oh, you should watch Birds then. It's just they basically drew a bunch of black dots in the sky because that's all they could do back then. But we've come a long way, right? But what I want to challenge us is don't let, no matter how riveting or sound effects or piano, low tones or violin screeches happen, don't let that be the way you think about the supernatural. It'd be like if you had your ideas about space from Star Wars. Star Wars spaceships, they go when they go by, right? But there's no gravity, so there could be no sound waves. So in space, you would not hear sound of spaceships if they were going by. You wouldn't hear the TIE fighter engine in space.
It's just the soundtrack of...
Yeah, it's a void.
Yeah.
No one knew that.
For example. Everyone knew that, right?
I didn't know that.
Oh, well, it's true. So don't take Star Wars lightsabers. A lightsaber like that, not possible. Lasers are possible, but not a lightsaber, because there's no way to stop. There's no way to have a stop fixed point with a beam of light, for example. Maybe one day that'll change, but I'm just saying, don't take your cues from Star Wars. But there is a new Star Wars movie coming out. Anyone want to go see it? We're going to go see it this December. Disney's kind of ruined it,
We
so.
don't care. We like the Mandalorian. We don't need another one.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good.
The Mongolian.
But with all seriousness, the reason I bring that up is because our text today deals with the demonic. And I want us to learn how to take our cues from the Bible and the way it paints the picture of the supernatural world, and not what we heard or urban legend or even things in our culture. There's a lot of tall tales from all kinds of people, all kinds of background about things like this. But the Bible can give us the truth on it. And so we want to know the truth. And so here's an insight into that. Although this is not all the text is about, that's the way I want to start up things. Everyone in Mark chapter 9? Matthew, Mark, Luke, you went too far. So it's second gospel, Matthew, Mark. And we're going to be not in verse 1, but in verse 14. You guys see there, Mark chapter 9, verse 14. And I like you guys to see the actual wording, so it'd be good to have your Bible open the whole time if you can, please. That's the ideal way. If you don't have a Bible, there's Bibles right back there. So some background to this. Right before this was what was called the Transfiguration. Anybody know what the Transfiguration was? Jesus on a mountain with some disciples. What happens? Yeah, shows the glorified shine, right? Right. Similar in some ways, Moses when he came down from Sinai. Shine, right? So Jesus is on a mountain. They don't know which mountain. But he's with two of his disciples, and now they're coming down into the valley off the mountain after the Transfiguration. Because if you've ever seen Jesus of Nazareth, 1977 movie, Gabe used to always quote that. He knows that movie, because I remember we used to quote that back in the day.
It's a great movie.
He kind of looks otherworldly, though. He's like kind of glowy and light around him, and he's all white, blue-eyed guy. Jesus did not look like that. He didn't walk around levitating. Right? He didn't have a mist around him. He didn't let his soul glow. You know what I'm saying? That's not Jesus. He was an average first century Jew guy. That's Jesus. That's why Judas had to kiss him on the cheek, because he looked like everybody else. They didn't know who it was, right? Judas didn't say, pick out the glowy guy with blue eyes, because that's not who Jesus was. He had to go, it's this guy, right? So Jesus comes down, though, and it seems the glowing has stopped because he says, don't tell anybody. And if they were glowing, that wouldn't make sense, right? They're like glowing, what do you want me to do? I look like I just left Chernobyl, right? So they come down, and then there's something going on. And that's where we pick up in verse 14. Verse 14 reads this. And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and scribes were arguing with them. So the they is Jesus and 2 disciples he had with him, right? So there's a crowd down there because people probably saw the disciples. They figured where there's smoke, there's fire. So they figured Jesus must be around. But Jesus isn't there. So there's some kind of argument. And that's kind of how life is, right? You come down from some mountaintop experience and you're right into the, what are you guys arguing about? That's exactly what Moses came off the mountain. He's like, man, I've been with Yahweh. And they're down there having a giant, crazy Lake Havasu party, you know? That's what was going on in Sinai. So straight up disobedience. Here, it's disbelief. It's not disobedience in the same way, it's disbelief. But there are some parallels between Exodus 32 and this. So, and immediately, remember the word immediately is Mark's favorite word. It's a gospel of action. It's the shortest gospel, only 16 chapters, right? And he likes things to be immediate. There's not going to be some long birth story and all that. But here's what's so interesting. This account is in Matthew and Luke. We're about to read, but it's much shorter. So this is one of the places where Mark had more detail than the other two guys. Put those three together, those three gospels are called the synoptics. When you have Matthew, Mark, and Luke, synoptics. So out of the three synoptics, he has more detail. One reason is because Mark loves to show Jesus' power. And this story showed Jesus' power, and so Mark has more detail here. So immediately, all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. This is the first time you're going to see the crowd running. The crowd's going to run another time. So you almost get this idea of crowds running after Jesus. So this is what's going on here. This word greatly amazed is like utter shock, like they're marveling is the way the word is. And they see Jesus, they're amazed. And it probably had to do with the timing of his arrival. Can't be because it's shiny, because remember, he said don't tell anybody, so that wouldn't make sense. But it seems like he came at just the right moment. So the crowd's like, oh, right? And they ran up to him and greeted him. First century Jews in this time would give kind of a salute, which would be translated peace to you or peace unto thee in the King James, which is kind of the idea of shalom. So they might say shalom. You know, the crowd's like peace to you, peace to you. It's a greeting kind of thing. So that's what happened so far. Then verse 16, and he asked them, what are you arguing about with them? Now Jesus always asks questions, and he always knows the answer to the questions, right? So disciples are on the road, they're arguing, and he's like, hey, what are you guys arguing back there on the road about? The gospel says they didn't want to say because they were arguing about who's going to be greatest in the kingdom. So they're just like, nothing. He's like, hey, you want to be great? So he launches into a discussion about what it means to be great. He already knew what they were arguing about, but they didn't want to say nothing. So Jesus asks, and it's interesting, no one says anything about what they're arguing about, but this is where Dad decides to step in. Mark 9:17, and someone from the crowd answered him. So it's someone, so maybe they couldn't see him yet. Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. All right, we'll stop there in a second, because the way my Bible is, I got to turn the page for the next one. So someone yells out from the crowd and says, my son is here. I brought him to you. He's got a spirit that makes him mute. Now, spirit here, it's a generic word, just pneuma, which Holy Spirit also has pneuma. So it doesn't say demon yet. In fact, it's not going to say demon. It's going to be later on. You're going to see it's kind of a spoiler alert. It's going to say unclean spirit. So he's saying, my son has a spirit and it affects him. So the father has diagnosed part of the problem, right? Here's my son. He has a spirit. It makes him not be able to speak. So why do you think he's bringing him to Jesus, everybody? To do what?
Miracle.
Right. Now, a lot of people, if they followed the way a lot of these modern day exorcists were, this is where they'd be like, oh, what kind of objects do you have in your house? Or stuff like that. Have you heard people talk about stuff like that? Mm-hmm. Jesus doesn't do any of that. That kind of idea you don't ever see in Scripture. You don't see objects directly. So go ahead.
Or either what you believe in or what you have in your home. Like
Yeah.
worship.
Yeah, you don't see that kind of mysticism where you have objects endued with power or evil spirits like particular objects as far as things. You don't see that kind of thing in Scripture. But you're going to see the way Jesus deals with this. And this is a very interesting way to see how he deals with it. Because Jesus performed exorcisms. It means he cast out demons out of people. But he doesn't do it like Bob Larson. You guys know who Bob Larson is? He set up shop in Scottsdale. What's your demon's name? Blood Baby. Why are you called Blood Baby? Because I can only be driven out by the blood of a baby. There's people, buy my new VHS tape, Top 10 Exorcisms of 2010. There's people who really do this stuff, right? This is not the biblical view. The problem is that silliness, or what you see in Hollywood, numbs you to the real fact that there are real demons who really hate you, who really do control aspects of people's lives, who really do oppress them, and who are a real problem, and who really hate us. So we can't be numb to that. But in a society like ours, generally, Satan likes to play the back. He doesn't want to come out all... It's like in the old Star Wars movies. Who was Darth Sidious, the Emperor? He was the Chancellor. He was the top politician. He didn't come out like, hey, everybody. He's like, hey, I'm going to pass this legislation. And he was like that. And later on, once he got into power, then he revealed who he was. In our society, people are like, I don't really believe in the devil and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people are like that. So Satan's like, okay, that's good. Don't believe it. That's better. So Satan likes to chill. In places where people are impressed with spiritual acts of power, you tend to see a lot of times Satan showing up there. A lot of times in societies with different kinds of understanding. Satan is smart. He knows how to play even to a society. Doesn't mean it will never happen in the United States. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it's not as common, especially it was in the first century. If you read Mark's gospel, he has 13 to 20 miracles. 4 of them are exorcisms. The most common type of miracle in Mark's gospel is the exorcism. But if you read the whole Bible, it's not filled with exorcisms. It's not filled with demonic oppression and people being demonized. It's in there, certainly, especially in the book of Acts. What does that seem? It seems as if during Jesus' ministry, Satan is doing an all-out blitz. You guys know what a blitz is, right? For the ladies, someone define a blitz. Oh, maybe a lady could define a blitz. You gonna try, Betty?
I know it's football play.
She's got the sport.
I know it's football play. And I know that it is the offense that does the blitz.
No.
Or the defense.
Gabe, tell us about a Pittsburgh Steelers blitz.
Oh my God. Everybody rushes the quarterback.
Do they know how to know?
The linemen, instead of going where you think they're going to go, they all attack the quarterback to get a sack. Right? Does that work?
Jump out once.
But at least you tried. Oh, you were about to have it?
Yeah.
Oh, because you went like this.
Yeah, I knew it was a defense play. That's all I
Oh, okay. Anyway, Satan did a blitz. He's like, oh, we got the quarterback. Let's try to sack him. So you see extra demonic activity, it seems, during this era. Because if you read the whole Bible, certainly Satan's existence is recognized and there's evil powers at play, especially in the Old Testament with the idols. The Bible tells us that behind idols are demons. Mm-hmm. Not that they are demons themselves, but the ultimate power, because sometimes there's false miracles. Remember the Egyptian magicians actually performed some miracles or feats of supernatural ability, it seemed? And they said, we can't do any more after a certain point, right? But up to a point, they were matching what Moses did. Remember that? The rod that turned to a snake? Yeah. But then Yahweh's snake ate up the Egyptian snake? What's going on there? So we see this, and we're going to learn about the way things should be from Jesus himself. So turn to my page, verse 18. Whenever it seizes him, so you ever been to the doctor, and the doctor's like, tell me what's the problem. You're like, well, when I cough, right? You tell him this thing. Oh, maybe. Well, no, it can't be that, because the Father is doing that in a sense with Jesus, the good doctor. Whenever so this is separate than the Son himself. It seizes him. So it's grabbing him almost. It throws him down. So the Father's recognizing the Son's not just falling, it's actually throwing him like a forceful. And if you look in the Greek, that's exactly what it is. It's to cast down or tear down or pull down. It seizes him, throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. Now, foams. That's kind of like animalistic behavior, right? Think of like a rabid dog. Grinds his teeth. I mean, I do that sometimes at night, right? You don't want to have to wear a retainer. But I don't think it's because I'm demon possessed. Just got to wear the retainer, right? Becomes rigid. Almost the rigid idea is like to be dried up. So that's stiff. So when we look at this behavior, we see the Father understands this is not normal. He doesn't think that it's just, because some people have looked at this and said, well, this sounds like this could be epilepsy, right? And so sometimes you have people who say, well, this is because people back then thought that all diseases were caused by demons, and so really this is epilepsy, and so he's bringing this kid to Jesus, but really it's just epilepsy. But they were so ignorant they thought it was all demons at the time, right? First of all, they knew the difference, and I can show you some verses later for that. But second of all, the Father knows this is not normal the way it's happening. Now, hypothetically, you could have someone who was epileptic and was demonized. Do you see what I'm saying? There's no reason you couldn't have both. But notice the Father says the demon makes him mute, or the spirit, specifically language, makes him mute. Meaning some of these things go beyond. And you're going to see later on, and it's foaming at the mouth. Satan wants to destroy us. We'll see in the text here. But he also wants to destroy the image of God in us. So we are made in the image of God, in his likeness. We are made, in essence, in a sense, you have to take this the right way, not the way the prosperity guys mean it, but to have co-regency or co-rulership with God on the earth in a proper way. That's what Adam was supposed to do, in a proper way, right? Now, Satan wants to deface that image of God that we all have, that man and woman equally possess. There's not one greater than the other in that sense. It's called the imago Dei. Doesn't mean we look like God. Doesn't mean that he's invisible. John 4 tells us that. It means characteristics, abilities, attributes, their similarities, and we possess those. And I think the biggest one is actually the idea of proper rulership and authority. In our case, it's over the animal kingdom and the creation God has given us. Remember, Adam had to work in the garden. But Satan wants you to look and be like one of the animals. And that sometimes can be achieved through a variety of ways. Have you ever seen somebody who dances around on the street corner with no music playing and bends down and picks up objects that aren't on the ground and then falls down and screams and boxes somebody who's not there and curses out someone and waits for them to respond and there's no one there and then curses back at the person and tells them stop doing this and stop doing that? What did I just describe?
Meth head, no?
Yeah, someone on 27. No, that's exactly what I described.
You see it more nowadays than before.
I described somebody on 27th Avenue, didn't I? Mm-hmm. Now, that's sad. Satan loves that. He wants you to be defaced and to lose your rational faculties and to not care about your hygiene. Satan loves that because he wants to destroy you because you're made in the image of God. Satan hates Christians especially, but guess what? He doesn't just hate Christians. Satan hates non-Christians. That's why he goes to war with them too as well. If he's at a hit list, it's Christians, non-Christians, right? But non-Christians are on there as well. And so you see this and you realize this. Now, I'm not saying that everyone that gets sick on drugs or anything like that is demon-possessed. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying this, Satan will find any way he can to have you be these ways instead of who you're supposed to be. Now look at this. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able. So the disciples tried and tried and tried, but the demon, the unclean spirit, stuck around, stayed. One thing you see here is unclean spirits, they don't like to leave where they are. Again, they're never in objects. It's not in the Bible. But they do appear to be. And then when I say in, understand, that's sort of euphemistic because they're not physical. So cartoons will portray like a little Casper guy going inside of a body, and then leaving. We do that to help us understand, but these demons aren't physical. Even when you have the little Casper thing, it's like some kind of physical translucent thing. They're not physical, right? Name one time the Bible describes the appearance without strictly symbolism of a demon. It never does. Satan is ugly with horns and goat. It doesn't say any of that. It doesn't say that, right? So there's a relationship aspect. Just like we have a relationship with God, but we're not shaking his hand, right? It's a different kind of thing. There's an unhealthy relationship between the person being demon oppressed or possessed and what you might call the bearer, the person who is the person, right? Some people say host, but the problem is these can lead us to think in two physical terms. Now, there's physical manifestations, aren't there? We just saw that. But it's not like, ooh, the demon's on the tip of my finger. But the demon has ability, it seems, to an extent, to control motor actions. You'll see this right here. And he answered them, O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me. Now that's interesting, right? So he doesn't seem to be talking to the dad, right? He's talking to everybody. Someone's in the corner like, it's not my fault. I didn't do anything. I just watched it. Why are you calling us faithless generation for? Jesus is including, in essence, Israel at this time, basically. What's going on here? He sees the disbelief. He sees the scribes over there arguing with the disciples. They're always doubting his validity as Messiah. They're always trying to cause a problem, right? They say they want the Messiah who's promised, but they want the Messiah on their terms. So if the Messiah is not how they wanted the Messiah to be, they'll reject the Messiah, even if it's what God is actually doing. So you're the wrong kind of Messiah, Jesus. Even though Jesus is the Messiah, Jesus sees all this, knows all this. It's been throughout his whole ministry at this time. And here's another example. And he sees demonic warfare where there's victory of the wicked over everything else. And he says, oh, faithless generation. They're not holding fast. They're not faithful. And it's interesting, generation, this happened sometimes in the 30s. Count a generation usually is 40 years. Jesus made multiple prophecies about what would happen within a generation. And guess what happened? 70 AD, who came to town and destroyed the whole city, including the temple? The Romans. That's right. Literally on the nose. Now, this the prophecy I'm talking about is not right here, but the word generation leads me to talk about the way Jesus often talked about a generation. Yes, he means people there, but it's like you guys. Remember what had happened in the wilderness? Caleb and Joshua came back with a good report from the land, and all the other spies were like, we can't conquer those guys. Remember that? Yeah. We look like grasshoppers in their sight. So God was like, all right, tell you what, everyone under 18, you're going to wander around the wilderness, you're going to die, and then the next generation, I'll take them because you guys aren't ready. So that's what they did. They were a faithless generation. So here, Jesus has the same frustration with his people that Yahweh did in the Old Testament. There's one passage that kind of gives a sense of this. Let me turn there. Let me see where I put it. It's in the book of Psalms. We're going to go back to Mark, so don't leave it completely or anything like that. But it's Psalm 95. I want to show you guys just one thing that portrays this. Because sometimes Jesus gives explicit affirmations that he is God. Other times Jesus just does and says things that are like, you shouldn't really be saying that unless you're in some way God. This might be one of those examples. Psalm 95. Psalm 95. I'm going to start right here. All right. Verse 7. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as at Meribah. That's a place in the wilderness in the Old Testament. When your fathers put me to the test, and put me to the proof, though they had seen my work. That's doubt. The generation that saw the Red Sea part is the same generation that was like, you're going to let us die out here. We can't conquer these people. The same generation that saw the waves crash down on the Egyptians and wipe out their army has no faith in God going forward. Rebelling against Moses, wanting to kill him. I mean, if you read the account, it's crazy. No faith. So, you ever met someone be like, well, I don't believe in God, but if I saw my name in the stars with my birthday, then I believe in God. Nope. They saw all this and still doubted God. In fact, the famous atheist Richard Dawkins came out recently and said, I used to say that if I saw my name in the stars, I would believe in God or something like that. But I've come to realize since that not even that would convince me. It could be aliens. This is what he said. whatever that happens, you can find a way to interpret it away. Didn't the Pharisees know that Jesus really rose from the dead? What did they do? Hey, take this money and say the disciples came and stole the body. What's wrong with you? That's the hardness of the human heart. Didn't Pharaoh really see all the cows of his people drop dead while the Israelites are eating Burger King? Yes, he did. Did he believe? No, he did not. Pharaoh said, I'm God. I'm Amun-Ra, made manifest, the king, the keeper of the peace. And chaos is out there. This is old Egyptian stuff about what they believed. They believed he was basically divine. So people could see whatever from Jesus. You cast out demons? You must have power from Satan. Didn't they accuse him of that? Yes, they did. In fact, there's something called the Babylonian Talmud. It's a Jewish source compiled after Jesus was gone already, but it represents an earlier strand of Judaism. So it could go back to the 1st century, some of it. In one of the parts of the Babylonian Talmud, it talks about Jesus. So this is a Jewish source, a non-believing source. Guess what pejorative term it uses to describe Jesus? Starts with an S. Sorcerer. Sorcerer.
Wow.
Calls Jesus a sorcerer. What does that mean?
Wizard.
Yeah, wizard. Yeah, that's Mr. Wizard to you. That means wizard, right? So they're basically saying, oh yeah, he had some power, but it wasn't from up there, it's from down there. That's that Jesus guy. Guess what? That's in the New Testament itself. Because if you see Jesus cast out devils and demons, you got to have some kind of explanation. But if your heart is hardened, you're not going to let the evidence convince you. That's why it is good to give evidence and proofs. We're doing an apologetics conference. That's part of what we're going to do in February. But at the end of the day, we recognize who gives the person even the ability to have the faith. It's God. Jesus is going to say in John 6 that no one can come to me on their own, right? It's a Trinitarian work. It's a miracle every day. If we never saw anyone raised from the dead the rest of our life, every time someone is saved, it's a miracle.
That's right.
And so this is important to recognize because you're going to see the hardness of the heart. But let me continue on with this song real quick before we go back to Mark. Would your fathers put me to the test and put me to the proof, though they had seen my work? For 40 years I loathed that generation and said, they are a people who go astray in their heart. God's almost like, oh, you want to go astray in your heart? I'll have you go astray in the wilderness too, right? They have not known my ways, or the way to get to the promised land, apparently. Therefore I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. That's the same thing here. Mark chapter 9, you're going to see it. Jesus says, O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? How long do I have to put up with this? But then he says, bring him to me. So maybe they were worried that someone was going to flip out and have one of his spells, so he might be over there or something, because he's not right beside him, it appears. It says, bring him to me. So now they bring the son to him. And they brought the boy to him. Verse 20 of Mark chapter 9. And when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. Notice this. Who saw Jesus?
The Spirit.
The Spirit. But then who convulsed?
The boy.
Right. So you see the Bible is showing you two separate personalities. Do you see that? But you also see the Spirit in some way affecting the boy's physical abilities, right? You see this. And there's some kind of fight. And it's like he's rolling around, foaming out, just like the dad said. And Jesus asked his father. So again, not some long conversation about how did you get in there? And was this because Grandpa a long time ago did Santeria or something like that? Doesn't do any of that. But he does ask some questions, but he asks the dad. Because I think it's weird when some of these fake exorcist guys have long conversations with demons. Why do you think they're going to tell you the truth?
Right.
If it's really a demon, what? The demon was going to place his hand on the Bible, whole truth. What is this? What is this? What are you going to get? Where were you at 10 o'clock last night? It's a show, right? But again, the demonic is real. And have you ever heard someone say, I felt a dark presence? There's people who have not believed in God. And there's people, I've even heard about, there's some cases of this, where they are atheists, but they still believe in the devil because they feel like they've experienced actual evil up close and personal. And they still deny the existence of God, but there is something dark spiritual in this world. Now, I think that's logically, that doesn't make sense, right? Where you have that. But some people feel like, I've experienced this or seen this. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Yep. Have you guys ever had anyone tell you these kind of stories? Now remember, everything they say doesn't mean it's accurate, but sometimes people have seen stuff, right? I felt a dark presence. They'll say something like that. But notice here that you see this behavior, and Jesus asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. So he's a boy, but yet this has been happening a long time. Now how? The Bible doesn't say. Doesn't get into all that. But this is something that's plagued this child for a long time, right? And now he goes into more detail about what happens. If you notice, every time Jesus asks him a question about this situation, the father gives more detail. I like this father. He went out of his way, whatever he's doing that day, to bring his boy to Jesus. Jesus asked a different question. The father changes the subject. He says, what about my boy, basically? He's defending his boy in a sense. He's trying to do what he can, right? And look at this father. He knows this boy's situation very well. He's describing it to a T, isn't it? So he's attendant to his needs. He knows what's going on with his son. Do you guys see this? This is a good model of a father. What he's doing here. You could say of a parent, but here we have a situation where the father's the one bringing him, right? And he's speaking up for the boy. He's never judging him. I just wish he would die. He's, I didn't want kids anyway. He doesn't. He's just saying, here's the situation. Can you help me? Right? And he's right on the money here. How long has it been happening to him? He said from childhood, and it has often cast him. Notice again, this throwing down language. Into fire and into water. The Greek word there is I think hydrata, which means lots and lots of water. So the idea is like in a pool or a lake, trying to drown the kid. So have you seen those Facebook videos? It's like superhero dads where the little girl's swinging and she falls off about to go on a rock and the dad grabs her at the last second. You see those videos? That I think was this father's whole life, because this boy is constantly throwing himself into fire. There's open fire everywhere. What did they cook with back then? They didn't have a microwave. So there's always a fire every time. It's like, somebody needs to watch Jacob. You know what I'm saying? Water, so they had to always be watching him. This father must have saved this kid's life dozens of times. Because why isn't the demon successful? See? And look what I like how the father knows what's going on to a T. Look what he says here. And it is often, so this is a lot, since childhood, cast him into fire and into water to destroy him. Now, isn't that interesting? Because it seems like these demons want to be in relation to some kind of living being. Remember, don't put us in judgment yet, Jesus. They once said, send us into the pigs. Jesus is like, this guy shouldn't be raising pigs anyway. That's not really kosher. So sure, go into the pigs. And then they drive the pigs off into the cliff, right? Remember that? But yet, the demon is destroying the host. That's all they do. John 10, the thief came to steal, kill, and destroy. Those are three different things. That's his nature. That's what he does. But we kill and destroy. Who are we imitating? Satan. And guess what? We've all done that. We've all stolen or wanted to. We've all destroyed something, and sometimes even someone or wanted to. And because of the hate in our hearts, Jesus says we've all murdered in our hearts. Yeah. Guess what? Our sin reflects the demonic traits of Satan. That's why we need Jesus. It often casts him into fire and water to destroy him. And this is why you shouldn't align yourself with Satan. He wants ultimately to destroy you. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Notice the Father puts himself in an intercessory role, doesn't he? Help who? Us. This is a good dad. I like this guy. Help us. But it appears his faith has been shaken up. Why are you bringing to Jesus if you don't think he'd do anything? Well, if you could do anything. I think the disciples' failure, he's like, well, I don't know if you could do it now. Because remember, the disciples, they could not cast this unclean spirit out, right? Mm-hmm. So the guy's like, if you could do anything. And this is the kind of God we want. Jesus reflects the kind of God we want. Here's what I mean by that. You could have a weak God who's like, man, I really want to help you, but my hands are tied. I can't do anything. Like, there's some Christian versions who basically have a God who's like, I really want to help, but I can't override the free will of my creature, so sorry. Then there's other versions of God where he's like, or sometimes like in the Greek pantheon, the God's like, hey, I got all the power in the world to give you a good harvest, but I don't really want to give you a good harvest. You humans are really noisy, you're really irritating. There's gods portrayed like this in ancient literature. I don't want to help anybody. In fact, here's a lightning bolt, right? There's gods like that in ancient literature. You want a God who has compassion and the power to act. Now, does God always do what we want? No, he's not a genie in a bottle that we rub the right way and he does whatever we tell him to do, right? But the Father asks, and I love this. This is my favorite part of the story coming up here in a second. Jesus said to him, if you can? Jesus is all like, yeah, I can. What do you mean if you can? What are you saying that for? You see how Jesus repeats his words? I like that. All things are possible for one who believes. Amen. What's he doing there? He's challenging the man's faith. He's challenging to trust in him fully. Now the prosperity guys will tell you to turn here, and they'll say, let's read this verse. And they'll say, so you can have all the money you want, because all things are possible. You can get that promotion. All things are possible to him. Don't you believe? In this passage, it has nothing to do with acquiring material possessions. It has nothing to do with wealth gain. It has to do with trusting in God for his strength when you're weak and can't do something. Do you see what I'm saying?
Amen.
That it's about the person's level of trust in God. And here's the most honest answer of all time that reflects all of us if we're honest. Immediately, Mark's favorite word, the father of the child cried out and said, I believe. Help my unbelief. Right? This is the part of the message where I'm going to quote John Calvin. Because I like what John Calvin said here, and here's why. People sometimes think John Calvin was like a mean guy with a long beard. He did have a long pointy beard, according to the paintings, right? But they forget how pastoral he was. He was a shepherd of a congregation in Geneva. And look what he said here in his commentary. He said, he declares that he believes and yet acknowledges himself to have unbelief. These two statements may appear to contradict each other, but there is none of us that does not experience both of them in himself. Herself, right? So someone's like, do you believe in God? I believe. Help my unbelief. Do you believe God will do what he said? I believe. Help my unbelief. That's a lot of... Remember Peter went out in the water? Hey, I'm just like Jesus. And he looks down and he believes. Help his unbelief. That's our situation. And I like this, that he answered honestly. Because you see, Jesus does answer. Because Jesus does have compassion on them, doesn't he? God has compassion. And that's why this story, if you notice, Jesus does judge the generation of faithless Israel. But Jesus rewards this man's plea to him by giving what he requests. God has compassion on you in your situation. You can go to him. You can ask him things. You can talk to him. He has compassion. And we as Christians need to reflect that. If someone had a demon, some of us might be like judging them, like they must play with a lot of Ouija boards and all this. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't warn people, all this. But notice Jesus had compassion on him and he acted. That should be a first goal that we have too, I think. Now look at this, verse 25. And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, so it seems like they kind of got away and they were talking, but then whoosh, here they come. He rebuked the unclean spirit. Now up to this point, it just said the spirit, but now it's fully kind of recognized for what it is. The unclean spirit. He rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you mute and deaf spirit. Well, I didn't know the spirit was deaf as well, that it was causing that. But it appears that's another one of the ways. Notice you find more and more about the boy's condition due to demonic activity as we go on. It appears here that you have a situation where he's also causing that. Jesus knows. And he says, you mute and deaf spirit, I command you. Now he doesn't say in Jesus' name because he has his own authority. When we say in Jesus' name, we're saying by the authority of him, not of me. That's what we're saying. It's not a magical spell. If we say in the name of Jesus, we're saying he has the authority to do this and you have to obey because of that. Jesus is not going to say in the name of me, but he says, I command you to do what? Come out of him and never enter him again. And that's good because the Bible talks about sometimes you have a situation where a person doesn't, for example, get saved after a demon is expelled from their life. And Jesus talks about that demon comes back with 7 stronger demons and makes it worse than in the first place. You guys have probably seen something like that. Maybe not literal demonic activity, but something where someone's life like cleaned themselves up, didn't get with the Lord, and it was worse the next time around. Maybe that's happened to us, right? Right? That's why we got to pray. Lord, help us. So look at this, though. Verse 26. And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, the unclean spirit did not like this. It came out, and the boy was like a corpse. So that most of them said. Notice, most of the crowd thought this. So the unbelief is first, nobody could cast the demon out. Now the unbelief is, Jesus, you killed him in the process. That's like, which one do you rather have? Your son be demon-possessed or dead? Because watch what they're all going to say. Most of them said, he's dead. Thank you for your expert opinion. Right? That's what they all thought. Dang, Jesus done killed this boy. He's dead. But look, and you know what? I don't mind getting a little allegorical here. This to me is a picture of salvation. We're plagued by our sin and wicked oppression of the demonic realm. The old man, the Holy Spirit puts to rest, and then watch what happens. I'm not saying this story didn't really happen. It did. But I'm saying I see a picture here in some ways parallel to our own salvation. And look what it says. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up. The boy didn't get up on his own. That's like us. We need this. That's what we need. We don't just need a ladder. We need to be pulled out. Good. He pulls up this boy who appears dead, but isn't, lifts him up, and he arose. And so that's actually the end of the account. At that spot right there. Now, I don't have time to show you all the verses, but I've got a list here of verses. I just want to say this before we go on, because it could be a sensitive issue. That show, and there's especially one in Matthew 4, that shows the gospel writers knew the difference between unclean spirits and that kind of possession and ailments, illnesses, disease, and sickness. They did not think all sickness was caused by demons. Because there's people who teach something like that, and that's not true. There's people who accuse the biblical writers of being ignorant that way. But you see places where they'll differentiate. You'll say, he healed all those who were sick and diseased and those who had unclean spirits. There's places where the Bible says that, letting us know they understood a distinction. Now, as we've seen here, sometimes demonic can cause some kind of physical manifestation, but it doesn't necessarily have to. Or they could coincide, a sickness with the demonic activity, right? And so we got to understand that, because they can be very harmful pastorally if you think every time you got someone sick, they got a demon. Then you're trying to, right? That's not good. That can be very painful to family. That's not what the Bible teaches. Just want to make that clear, okay? Does everyone understand that? The Father knew it was a spirit. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Genetic defects aren't supposed to be like that either, but we understand there's a difference between that and this. And the Bible does as well. That's important for us to understand. But now the account is over. And there's a little epilogue of 2 verses. And when he had entered the house, so they're away from the crowd, right? It's just the disciples. When he entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out? So like, what? And he said to them, this kind. Now, if you look, that word basically means this kind. What's the point of me saying that? It appears there's different sort of levels or strengths of demons. Jesus said in another place, go get demons stronger than him. This seems to be a kind of demon. The Bible doesn't go into great detail. You know what I'm saying? It's not there to satisfy curiosity. But it seems there's different kinds, different levels. Makes sense. There's different kinds of angels. Michael's an archangel. Gabriel's not described as an archangel, right? And he said to them, this kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer. Now, we are done, but I've got it in on a somewhat technical note. So everybody, are you ready for one last thing? But you're going to have to think with me. This is the last part. We're done. But you're going to have to think with me. Are you guys ready? This is going to be a little bit different. I need everyone to sit up. Give me 5 minutes. And then we're done. This is important for you to know. Some of you might not even like it, but it's important, okay? I tried to give practical application throughout this. I tried to speak directly, but this part's a little technical, but I think it's important to say something about briefly, okay? Does anyone have a King James Version Bible with them? Does anyone have a King James Version Bible? Can someone go on their phone, the King James Bible, real quick, and read to me Mark 9:29. Go ahead, that'll work. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Mark what?
Mark 9:29. What we just read. Jose got it right.
And so he said to them, "This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting."
Uh-oh. What's going on there? So what's the two words you have that we don't have?
Prayer and fasting.
Well, we got prayer.
Okay.
Oh, you got and fasting though, huh? Huh? Anybody know when the King James Version was translated? When it was first published? How about that? 1611, the only way to heaven. Just kidding. Just kidding, by the way. All right. At that time, there was a certain amount of biblical manuscripts known. Maybe a dozen in the Providence where the KJV came out of, right? And so they had access to some biblical manuscripts. About a dozen, it seems, or so, right? And they were relatively recent within their time frame. Does anyone know how many Greek, so just New Testament, we're not talking about the Old Testament, right now, 2019, about how many Greek New Testament fragments we have? So a piece of John, a whole book of Mark, stuff like that. Just make a guess. How many we have access to right now?
3,700.
Keep on going, buddy.
6,500.
Almost 6,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
On the first Price is Right, you were low, and then you went over. But that's all right. No, I'm glad you tried. Almost 6,000 Greek manuscripts we have now. And guess what? You used to have to go to travel to a museum to see them. You can still do that. But guess what they've done now? They take high-resolution photos and put them online, and you can look at them and actually see the words right there, right?
Yeah.
So, when you used to make your mixtapes back in the day for your girlfriend or boyfriend, you would copy this tape to this tape. Which one sounded better? Original. Some corruption comes in through the noise because of copying. Same thing when people write down manuscripts. A scribe slips, adds an extra word in there. That happens. Doesn't mean the Bible's in error. It means when people make copies of stuff, they make mistakes sometimes, right? Now, if people make mistakes when they copy documents, which they do, is it better to have a few copies of the same document or a bunch? Which one's better?
Bunch.
A bunch. Why?
You got more.
More to compare. You can get closer to the original because you cross-check. If only one manuscript has an extra and all the others don't have that in that place, you know that copy's made a mistake there. And guess what? You get to do that 6,000 times, basically, in a certain way when it comes to the New Testament. The KJV was they made an excellent translation, best scholars of the day, but they didn't have the oldest manuscripts that we do have now. What's my point by saying that? The oldest and best manuscripts of the Bible, of this part of Mark, do not have the words "and fasting." In the Greek, it's actually kai nesteia, and kai, fasting. Those two words. They're not in the oldest and best manuscripts that we have. Meaning it's something that pops up a little bit later within more of the newer manuscripts of the Bible, right? That were copied later. Well, that's interesting. But here's something to know about that. It's not just in Mark 9:29 that the words "and fasting" are added. It's in Matthew 17:21. Same thing. KJV says "and fasting." Modern Bibles don't. Not only there, Acts 10:30. Same thing. "And fasting." Modern Bibles don't. Also, 1 Corinthians 7:5. "And fasting." Modern Bibles don't. What does that show us? If we're honest with ourselves, it shows us that scribes had a tendency when they saw prayer in certain situations to add "and fasting."
Yeah.
There's just no other way around it. But I have more. So I've given you 2 points for why "and fasting" actually does not belong in here. So people will say, "Oh, the newer Bibles took it out." No, because the older Bibles didn't have access to the best manuscripts. They added it, but they didn't know that it was added. Now, this is not some doctrine that changes much about Christianity. Should we fast today? Yes, we should, by the way. But we want to do it in the places where the Bible talks about fasting, because the Bible does talk about fasting, right? Jesus himself fasted. I'm not saying don't fast, right? What I'm saying is we don't want to add it where it says it. Jesus didn't say "and fasting" here in this particular part. Although how it got in there and those other 3 places, don't know, but here's 2 things to remember. 1, the oldest and best manuscripts of a variety of kind found in different places throughout the world, they don't have "and fasting." 2, there's 3 other places that we see this addition being added. So we see it's a tradition or a tendency of some scribes. But most of all, and this is really the thing that I think you should take away with, and this is, the reason I'm telling you this is when you see certain differences, don't just take someone's word for it. "Oh, they don't want you to fast, so it's a secret trick." to take it out of the Bible. That's not it. We just want to know what the Bible really said.
Yeah.
We want to fast. But if Jesus didn't say and fast here, I don't want to say he said it, right? If you say he said and fasting, you make Jesus contradict himself. Let's go to Mark chapter 2, and we're going to end with this. And I know it's a technical note, but I think it's important for us to know. Mark chapter 2. I'm going to read through this, but I want you to follow this. I'm going to ask you a question at the end of this in relationship to what we just talked about. So hold it all together. Listen to this and watch. Mark 2:18. Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. So it's a good thing, right? John's disciples. And people came and said to him, why do John's disciples and disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? And Jesus said to them, can the wedding guest fast while the bridegroom is with them? He's saying, hey, I'm the bridegroom. It's not the time to fast, right? You see, notice how he likes to ask questions. As long as they have the bridegroom, me, with them, they cannot fast. This is in the same book. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and they will fast in that day. No one sows a piece. And he goes on there, but I'm going to stop there for sake of time. Why is that important to what we just read? What did Jesus just say in response to why don't your disciples fast? He said, because they're a bunch of lazy bums? What did he say?
It wasn't their time.
Right. He had sanctioned them not fasting. Wouldn't that be kind of messed up if 7 chapters later and a man is speaking, he's like, man, you guys couldn't drive it out because you didn't fast enough. Like, bro, you said it was cool not to fast because you're the bridegroom, right? It was a test, bruh, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, what kind of master do we have? It's like Zen Buddhist tests. Takes me the opposite, right? No. Jesus isn't saying, you didn't fast and I did. He is saying this, though. Because did the disciples pray? Certainly. Not like Jesus, though. He had a total lifestyle pattern of dependence on the Father and in harmony with the Spirit. He's constantly in the morning drawing away to pray, constantly drawing away to pray. Jesus relied on the members of the Trinity, besides himself, the Father and the Spirit in his earthly ministry in a way that humans are supposed to do. We're supposed to emulate that behavior, right? Because he's fully man. Remember that. Jesus is praying constantly. And disciples, can't you stay awake for 1 hour with me, please? Right? Jesus is saying 2 things, and I think they're related. 1, you're a faithless generation. There was not enough faith or trust in God present. Remember? That we already saw that diagnosis. 2, their prayer was not enough of the absolute total dependence and reliance that is needed to go to war like this. Jesus had confidence this demon was going to come out because he knew he had utter dependence and utter harmony with the members of the triune Godhead, right? That's the challenge to them, because one day he's not going to be there and they are going to need to do this on their own. And guess what? The book of Acts showed us that Peter did. When you read the book of Acts of the Apostles, we see Peter casting out demons. Amen. And he didn't fail. Now there's other people that failed, the 7 sons of Sceva, but not Peter, not Paul. We see them casting out demons just like their master did so many years earlier. I think they learned the lesson. And so the point here is that is what's needed for the spiritual warfare at this level, right? Jesus took care of the problem, and that's still what we need today. I think that's what's being said here, and I think it was important to end with that because those questions do come up. We could talk more about it if you'd like, but now is the time to end.